What up, though? I know I'm kind of hitting you kind of quick again, with the real talks, but something happened today, and it got me to thinking. When I get to thinking, I got to put my thoughts out, put things out into the world. And so today I want to talk about something that I didn't understand for a long time, maybe until about last year. But I want to talk about grief. So today's real talk is about grief and loss. So today, a good friend of mine uh, told me that his mother passed last night, right? And that is a shocking, painful thing that is unimaginable for me. I fortunately still have my mother around and in my life. And sometimes I may even take that for granted because I don't call as often as I should, right? Or visit as often as I should. But even a thought of losing my mother is enough to send me spiraling, break my heart. And it's one of those things I can't even comprehend, right? As a world without my mother. A few years ago, my wife lost her mother, and they were really, really close. I mean, closer than most people that I've seen with their mother, right? When I met my wife, it was standard operating procedure that every single morning my wife called her mother while she drove to work. Every single morning, right? And oftentimes they would still talk on the weekends, right? To lose someone so close to you, right? Your mother, the person that created you, right? That nursed you, taught you everything in this world, you know, where you come from is unimaginable. And not to lessen that loss, right? Understand I haven't lost my mother, right? So I have to look at it from the perspective of the people I have lost. And then look at how I was taught to deal with loss and grief as a young child and how that affected me, as an adult. So the first significant person in my life that I lost was my great grandmother, right? And so, backstory, my great grandmother practically raised me when I was a child. My mother was busy. She was a young mother, unwed mother. She was working, trying to make a better life for us, trying to make a better life for herself. I was We were living in a house with my mother, my aunt, my great grandmother, and my uncle. And so they all had to work, you know, and my great grandmother took care of me. And stories being true, my great grandmother, when I was a young child, used to take me to McDonald's every single day. And every single day on the way home, I would throw a temper tantrum and have a fit. And she got up and did it again anyway. And I remember as a young kid, as I got older and we moved, there wasn't a McDonald's, my great grandmother getting up and making me breakfast, even if it was just cornflakes with bananas cut up in them, which is ironic because I'm allergic to bananas, but didn't know that then, right? And I'm lactose intolerant, but didn't know that either. And on the weekends, she would make pancakes. And every time I got in trouble with my mother, my great grandmother was the one I would run to keep from getting my ass whooped, right? And so eventually, my mother, through hard work and everything she was doing, we were able to move out of my aunt's place, and move into an apartment, then another apartment. And then finally, my mother was able to buy a home. And so over the years, I started to grow up a little bit, and my grandmother got sick. To this day, I can't tell you what it was. I think it may have been stomach cancer. I can't remember. But the way it worked is I would go to my aunt's house where my great grandmother lived every morning, and I would ride the bus to school because my mother wanted to keep me in that same school zone. Right? We did that every day. My mother would get up like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. We get dressed. She'd drive me to my aunt's house. About 6:30 or so, I would walk down to the bus, take the bus, and go to school. And it just so happened my great grandmother had gotten sick. She had been in and out of the hospital, um, and then she came home. And in my young mind, everything's okay, right? She's home. What I didn't understand at the time that I do now as an adult is she was beyond anything they could do for her in the hospital. And it was the point where you go home and pass away. I didn't know that, right? I was too young to understand that. So every day, mother gets up, takes me over there. I go to school. I come home, and my great grandmother was in one of my aunt's bedrooms in a hospital bed, and there was another bed next to it. And I would lay in that bed and hang out with my great grandmother in the afternoons. So we come upon one of those 3-day weekends, right? And it's Monday. We don't got to go to school. My mother says, "Hey, do you want me to take you to your aunt's house to hang out with your great grandmother?" And I was a kid, I wanted to hang out with my friends and do kid shit. So I was like, "No, not today." Right. And that was the day my great grandmother passed away. And I remember vividly my aunt saying, you know, maybe it was at the funeral, or maybe it was sometime later that week, that my great grandmother didn't want to pass away with me in the room. So she held on until I wasn't there. Oftentimes we say these things in a way to kind of maybe comfort ourselves during loss. Remembering that the majority of my life, without me knowing it, without me understanding it, had a profound effect on me. It created this feeling inside of me that when bad things happen and I'm not there, then if I would have been there, maybe that bad thing wouldn't have happened. Even if it was outside of my control. You know, I remember when my best friend died, I think I was about 16. He died in a car accident uh, on a trip with his mother. They were in a church band. He was coming back, and there was a car accident. And we hadn't really hung out in a couple of years because I moved to California. He was still in Vegas. And I remember thinking, a part of me thinking, man, if I would have called him a week earlier, maybe he wouldn't have gone on the trip, and he would still be here. Right. So I think I've carried that kind of ideology my whole life. I lost two sailors in the Navy, and it was not my fault. There was no way to blame me. I wasn't there. Had nothing to do with it. The circumstances, whatever. But there was still a part of me that thought, what if I would have done this one simple thing, you know, but they still be here? And for 45 years, right, I've bottled up that feeling and that grief. Now, not to de escalate the conversation, but here is how I came to grips with it and understanding what grief was and how to understand what loss is and how to make myself better and not blame myself. So, as I'm out here in Hawaii, things started to get bad for me, and I started getting a dark place just simply because I'm surrounded by people in a dark place. And an opportunity presented itself where I could get a cat. If you know me, I'm not a cat person. That's not my vibe. Never owned a cat. My mother's always hated cats. Never even really been in the house with a cat except one point in my life, and that was 20, 30 years ago. And so a neighbor had found these stray cats and was trying to, take care of them and get them out to families. And my wife looked and she said, you probably need something else alive in the house for you to interact with. So I said, okay, sure. I'll think about it. So I tell the neighbor, I said, hey, bring the cat over and let me take a look at the kitten. She brings the kitten over and she's like, well, this is one of the ones I think you should have, but there's another one. Right. And I go, okay. So she brings the other kitten over. And within about 15 minutes, I knew that I was going to be the owner of two cats. Right. So these two kittens come into the house and they hide in the closet. I take off and I go to PetSmart and I buy everything that I think cats need: litter boxes, toys, kitten food, everything. I come home and I become the father of these two little cats. And cats aren't like dogs. You can't like obviously tell their sex. And I didn't know how to tell the sex of a cat. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to name the cats. And I'm a huge comic book nerd, a huge Marvel movies nerd. And my wife was like, you should name them something from the comics or the Marvels. And I said, okay, you will be Thanos and you will be Bane, right? Two bad guys. Shortly thereafter, I found out that they were both girls, but Thanos and Bane was just going to stick. They played around the house. They had fun. Bane was always a little bit bigger than Thanos, but I just figured, like dogs, sometimes you had to run under the litter. And then Thanos started to not play as much. Then she started to have accidents where she didn't use the litter box. And at first I got angry, and then I said, you know what? It's not her fault. Something else is wrong. Then I heard rumor that some of the other kittens that came from the litter um, had worms. So I make an appointment to the vet. I rush my kittens to the vet to get, medication. It's kind of an odd thing. I could tell the vet looked at me and couldn't believe that this angry looking black man was walking in there with two kittens and obsessively worried about how they were going to be. So I get the medication. I come home and I'm giving her the medication every day. I'm doing everything I can. It seems like she was getting a little better, but now she's not playing with her sister, and she's really lethargic. So I say, something's not working here. So I called a vet and I scheduled another appointment. And that appointment was going to be Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. So that Friday, I come home at about 10 in the morning and I find Thanos, and she's sitting in the middle of the floor, and she's peed and she's still sitting in it. right? If you know anything about cats, they're very, very clean animals. So I immediately panicked because I know this can't be good. I called a vet to see if I can get an earlier appointment or figure out, what to do. And they can't give me an earlier appointment. There isn't really any emergency clinics here. So I go, I get a towel, I clean her up, and I know I don't think she's going to make it until the appointment. So I sit with her on the couch, wrapped up in a towel, and I pet her because that's all I can do at this point. And she passed away. And I was angry. I was mad. Excuse me. And then it dawned on me. She didn't have much of a life. But the alternative would have been to be born as a stray, and she probably wouldn't have made it through, the first couple months of life. But what she did have, and what I did give her, was a home, food, and love. It wasn't my fault that she passed. I couldn't have prevented it. And that, ironically, is how I learned to get over this feeling that every time there was loss, it was my fault, and I could have done something better, right, uh, to prevent it. And it was also how I learned how to get through the grieving process because I didn't understand it before, and I had to get that. I guess the word they say is closure, right? To get to that point where it's like, okay, I've done everything I can do. This is the way things were meant to be, and I have to move on. So that's my thoughts on grief and loss. And I don't mean to compare, my grief or loss to anyone else's grief or loss or how they feel uh, when they lose loved ones. But I wanted to kind of give you the narrative of my first loss and how that affected me throughout my life, and then how I started to understand it and to be able to process it, uh, which is kind of an ironic way to do it. So I'm going to end this like I always end it. I'm just saying, fuck out of here. Holla at your boy.